Hi everyone, Omid from CodeLab here, and welcome back to the second video in our project management series on how to use Jira. So this video, we'll be walking you guys through some of the basic stuff on Jira that you need to know how to use, some of the basic interfaces and places where you will be spending most of your time as a project manager, as well as just sort of demoing how the platform works as a whole. Now, there's a ton of features on Jira. As I mentioned in the previous video, one of the reasons why it's used so much in industry is because it has so many different features and integrations. Because we do work on some smaller scale projects here at CodeLab, we won't be using most of those features. So I'll be skipping over most of the stuff here, but there's still a lot of great stuff that we are going to walk through. So the first thing here, obviously, when you get onto your actual Jira page for your specific project, the main thing that you do want to click on is this Kanban board right here. This is where most of your time will be spent. And the Kanban board, as we explained before, there is one piece of it that we actually didn't explain, and that's the concept of swim lanes. So you might notice that I have these little collapsibles here on mine called front end, back end, and bugs. So these are actually all called different swim lanes, and a swim lane is basically a different category for like tasks. So we have these 5 different categories for actually tracking the progress of tasks within the concept of a Kanban board, but we can also sort of like break off our tasks into groups as well. So it's not like we just have like 20 different user stories all under like one big category. Now they're nicely breaking up so that people can tell like, oh, this is a front end task, back end task, this one is a bug, stuff like that. But the main thing that you'll be doing is kind of creating and watching over these user stories, right? So how do I actually create one? Well, the blue big create button up at the very top is where you want to go. And there's a few things to note on this interface. So right off the bat, there's what project you're working on. If you only have one project, there's only going to be one thing to put here, but make sure that this is your project name. The next thing is the issue type. This will pretty much always be a story. Task, bug, we don't really deal with those. Epics, we don't deal with those. You guys might be familiar with them if you've heard about agile methodologies before. We don't really deal with epics since we have such short time spans for our projects to be completed anyways. The whole thing is like sort of one epic anyways. So we pretty much always deal with stories as our issue types. So this summary right here is basically the title. As you can see on the left in the background right there, those are all the summaries or the titles. So we can just put whatever we want here. You can also attach image or file. So if you need specific specifications or some example to be attached to the story, highly recommend using this feature. A description of the story. This is actually super important. We will have a follow-up video to this talking about how to actually write your descriptions properly. They're very important, but for now, that's just what it does. So there is the reporter. So this is essentially like who's taking like top level ownership for the story. And this is always the project manager because you're the person who people are reporting back to pretty much. I'm going to skip this little section right here for right now. And then right here we have the assignee. So this part, super important. You don't have to do this when you actually create the story. So normally whenever a story is in the backlog, we don't give it an assignee. We only give it one once it goes from get next to in progress. But you can actually assign it to anyone who has joined your Jira board so that they can have their name on it. Like you see my little OM in the bottom left right there or in the top left right here. And that's because this story was assigned to me. So now I'm the person programming, designing, basically taking head ownership for the story. Right here is a priority label. 5 different priority levels, pretty self-explanatory. These aren't too important since we do have backlogs and our stories are kind of created iteratively, but I would still highly recommend, just using your best guess, thinking what needs to come next. And then lastly, labels right here. We don't use these very much. And then epic link. So as I mentioned, we don't really use epics, but we do use them to break apart our swim lanes. So like front end, back end bugs, those are 3 sort of different epics. That's not the best use of an epic. If you're familiar with agile methodologies, it's not really properly correct, but it's how we like to split up these separate swim lanes on our boards. Just makes things very simple to track. So if this is a back-end story, front-end bugs, depending on which swim lane I want this to go into, I would just select that one. So I'll just select front-end. And again, we don't really use labels. Feel free to use them if you'd like, though. You're more than free to. But right up here, this part is really interesting. So you can actually link issues together using this nice little drop-down. Jira is super smart about this. So if this specific story that I'm creating right now blocks another story, meaning that another story can't be completed until this one is completed, I can actually select that issue and say, okay, whatever issue is represented by the code TP-5, that story can't be completed until this one is completed. So this is a really easy way to remind your developers or designers and just sort of like let them know and say, hey, this story is blocking this one needs to be completed first. You can also do vice versa and say that this story is blocked by this one. There's a few other options, not too important, but is blocked by and blocks, very important, and you need to use them whenever applicable. So that's the actual creation process. Something that you might be curious about is what that TP-5 actually means. So when you create your Jira board, you're asked to create an abbreviation for all of your stories. So I chose TP for mine. You'll choose one that's close or like somewhat relevant, or like an abbreviation for your project's name. So that's this little TP code, and the number right next to it is actually the story number. So this is a unique identifier to just kind of be able to identify the individual stories, and it's actually how we refer to them when we're talking about like individual specific stories, because rather than like say the name and then people have to go like scanning for the name, you can just refer to it by its story number. So say like, oh yeah, hey, I was working on story TP-5 and I was having some issues with X. And then it's very easy to find. People know what you're talking about. There's no sense of confusion. And again, right here, you can now see the interface. When you click on a story, it is completely editable, so don't worry if you mess it up when you first create it. Don't need to just go ahead and delete it. So you can actually see like where issues are linked. I went ahead and linked these issues before filming this video, so you can see this. Here's my description. Here's my name. I can still attach stuff. I can still link other issues right now. I can also add web links. I have a few other options down here. I can also add comments if I want to come back and say like, hey, just keep in mind this, or like if a developer wants to like update their progress on here and say, hey, gonna shelve this story for a few days. I gotta work on this feature first, more important. You know, that's an easy way to do it. And right here on the left are some nice details. Again, this is where you can change the assignee, you can change the reporter, but you shouldn't need to. Labels, if you do want to use them, and then story points. So this is a very important feature. So story points is how we estimate how long a task will take here at CodeLab. So one story point equals 1 hour pretty much. So if you create a story that's like 4 story points, that's saying this thing will require 4 hours worth of work. And we'll talk about how to break these up later, so that you should never go over like a certain story point value in your stories. But this is an easy way for you to be able to estimate how big of a sprint you have coming up for the next week. And also ask your developers and designers like, hey, how many hours do you have for this week? Okay, this guy has 10 hours. I'll give him a story with 10 story points. Easy. Or I can break him up into like a 5 and 5, 6 and 4, so I can meet his 10 hours before that week starts. It just kind of helps you manage and oversee and make sure that no one is doing too much or also conversely doing too little. So that's pretty much that. When it comes to the actual Kanban board itself. And again, this is where you will be spending most of your time. If you do want to create new swim lanes, you would want to click on this roadmap and then just click create epic to create a new epic. You'll only really need to do this once for like initial setup to create your separate swim lanes for categorization. Other than that, that's pretty much all of the time that you will be spending there. There are a few other options right here, nothing too big. There are some project settings in case you ever need to access those right here. You can change the details of your project, a few other things. If you'd like to go and explore around, feel free, but nothing is really required or anything like that. You do actually have the option though to link your Jira directly to your GitHub, and I would highly recommend this. So if you click on this code, you can actually link them directly. And that's just a super cool feature, because that means that when someone pushes a commit, if they title the initial part of the commit like TP-5:, that is syntax that Jira will actually be able to pick up. So they can link to your stories directly from GitHub. So if you're going back in the commit history and trying to see like, hey, what did the code look like when we worked on this specific feature, you can actually see the ticket number and you can have it link back to the story. Just super helpful and convenient. Takes a few seconds. I would just recommend doing it. But yeah, otherwise that is our basics on how to use Jira. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye.